I watched my daughter Abby's hands shake as she read the text from my father. 3 days of cooking for 23 people, her entire summer savings spent on ingredients, and countless hours perfecting her grandmother's favorite recipes, all destroyed by 12 words. We've decided to celebrate at a restaurant, adults only. The way her face crumpled broke something inside me. I didn't make a scene. I did something else entirely. 15 hours after my decision, our front door started shaking violently. Being a single mom to a teenage daughter isn't easy, especially when you work 40 hours a week as an office manager like I do. Our modest 3-bedroom house in Pine Creek isn't fancy, but it's been home to Abby and me since she was 7, after her father decided family life wasn't for him. We've managed just fine on our own, building our little traditions and finding joy in simple things. Abby discovered her passion for cooking when she was 12. It started with boxed brownies and mac and cheese, but quickly evolved into elaborate multi-course meals that would put some restaurants to shame. She's self-taught, spending hours watching cooking shows and practicing techniques. Her dream is to attend culinary school after graduation, and at 16, she already has a better understanding of flavor profiles than most adults I know. My mother Eleanor's 70th birthday was approaching, and when Abby suggested hosting a family dinner at our home, I was hesitant. Not because of Abby's abilities she could handle it blindfolded, but because of my father Frank. He's always been controlling, the type who needs to dictate every family gathering down to the napkin colors. A retired bank manager with old-fashioned values. He's never quite approved of my single motherhood or our modest lifestyle. "Grandma loves my cooking," Abby insisted, her blue eyes bright with excitement. "And I want to do something special for her. How could I say no?" Besides, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for Abby to showcase her talent to the extended family, particularly my father, who always seemed to dismiss her culinary ambitions with backhanded compliments like, "It's a lovely hobby, dear, but not a serious career path." Daniel, my boyfriend of 2 years, thought I was asking for trouble. "You know how your father gets, Wendy," he said one evening as we sat on my porch swing. "Maybe we should suggest a restaurant instead. Keep the peace." "It's important to Abby," I replied, watching her through the kitchen window as she meticulously wrote out a potential menu. "Besides, Mom deserves a celebration that's personal, not just another dinner at the lakeside where Dad knows the owner and gets the best table." Daniel squeezed my hand. "I get it. Just don't be surprised when Frank tries to take over." What I didn't tell Daniel was that I'd already started to notice a pattern. Whenever we attended family gatherings, my father would subtly undermine Abby's contributions. If she brought a dessert, he'd mention his golf buddy's son, who was a professional pastry chef. If she offered to help in the kitchen, he'd redirect her to simpler tasks, claiming my mother had a specific way she liked things done. I brushed it off as Frank being Frank traditional, slightly stuck in his ways, but not malicious, until I overheard a conversation between my mother and my Aunt Patty that changed everything. "Frank, you really should try Abby's lemon cake," my mother was saying during our Easter gathering. "It's absolutely wonderful." "Maybe later," my father replied dismissively. "You know those store-bought frostings have all sorts of artificial ingredients. Not good for your cholesterol." "But she made everything from scratch," my mother protested. "Eleanor, we've talked about this," he said in that tone that always shut down further discussion. That night, I confronted my mother privately. "Has Dad been telling you not to eat Abby's food?" She looked away, fidgeting with her wedding ring, a nervous habit she's had for as long as I can remember. "He worries about my health, that's all. And you know how particular he is about food. Mom, Abby uses organic ingredients and makes everything from scratch. She researches recipes for days to make them healthier without sacrificing taste." "I know, dear. He's just set in his ways." The realization hit me like a freight train. For years, my father had been subtly undermining Abby's cooking ambitions, even going so far as to discourage my mother from eating the food Abby prepared specifically with her dietary needs in mind. It wasn't just stubbornness or old-fashioned thinking, it was deliberate. That discovery should have been enough for me to reconsider the birthday dinner plan, but I pushed forward, believing that seeing 23 family members enjoy Abby's cooking would finally force my father to acknowledge her talent. I was setting us up for disappointment, but I was too blinded by my desire to prove him wrong to see it. The week before my mother's birthday, our house transformed into something resembling a professional kitchen. Abby had saved $700 from her weekend job at the local bookstore, and she spent nearly every penny on ingredients. She insisted on using only the freshest produce, premium cuts of meat, and specialty items that had to be ordered online. "Are you sure you want to spend all your savings on this?" I asked, watching her unpack bags of groceries one Tuesday evening. "This is an investment, Mom," she replied with the conviction only teenagers can muster. "Besides, I've been researching these recipes for months. Did you know Grandma's favorite dessert growing up was caramel apple pie? Her mom used to make it for special occasions, but the recipe was lost when their house flooded in the 70s. I found something similar and modified it based on what Grandma told me about it." My heart swelled with pride and a touch of worry. Abby was putting so much of herself into this dinner emotionally and financially. The stakes felt impossibly high. Every night after school, she'd be in the kitchen until well past midnight, testing recipes and techniques. Our refrigerator overflowed with labeled containers. Test batch 3. Too much rosemary or perfect texture, but needs more acidity. She made spreadsheets with cooking timelines, ingredient lists, and serving strategies. Nothing was left to chance. Meanwhile, I focused on transforming our modest dining area. We borrowed extra tables and chairs from neighbors and the community center. I sewed tablecloths in my mother's favorite shade of sage green and created centerpieces with photos from throughout her 70 years. Abby designed personalized place cards for all 23 guests, each featuring a memory or quality she loved about that family member. Daniel helped where he could, mostly by staying out of our way and occasionally bringing us dinner when we were too engrossed in preparations to cook for ourselves. One evening, as he watched me frantically polishing my grandmother's silver serving trays, he broached the subject I'd been avoiding. "Have you confirmed with your dad that everyone's coming? It seems like a lot of work if there's any chance people might not show." "Of course they're coming," I said, perhaps too quickly. "Mom called last week and said they're looking forward to it." Daniel's expression was skeptical. "And your father's okay with not being in control of the event?" I scrubbed harder at a particularly stubborn tarnish spot. "He hasn't said otherwise." Later that night, my sister Laura called. "We're not especially close. She lives in Seattle with her husband and twin boys, and she's always been better at maintaining the family harmony than challenging our father's authority." "So, looking forward to Mom's birthday dinner?" she asked after we exchanged pleasantries. "Absolutely. Abby's been working so hard. Wait until you taste her roast beef with Yorkshire pudding. It's Mom's favorite, and Abby's version is incredible." A pause. "That sounds amazing. I'm sure it'll be nice." Something in her tone made me suspicious. "What's going on, Laura?" "Nothing. Dad mentioned you guys were handling the family celebration this year. He seemed fine with it." "Why wouldn't he be fine with it?" Another pause. "No reason." "Oh, did I tell you about the Lakeside's new chef? Dad was talking about him at dinner last month when we visited. Apparently, he trained in France and does these incredible side presentations." My stomach dropped. "When were you at the Lakeside with Dad?" "Oh, just when we were in town for the twins' spring break. Dad insisted on treating us. Said he had to check out the new menu for future reference." I gripped the phone tighter. "Laura, has Dad made a reservation at the Lakeside for Mom's birthday?" Her silence was answer enough. "How long ago did he book it?" My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. "I don't know exactly," she hedged. "Maybe 2 weeks ago? Wendy, I'm sure he just made it as a backup plan. You know how he likes to have everything arranged." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to process what I'd learned. My father had made restaurant reservations 2 weeks ago, but deliberately kept it from me and Abby. He was letting us proceed with elaborate plans while holding his backup option in reserve. The manipulation was so typical of him that I should have expected it, yet it still felt like a betrayal. Daniel found me there, staring at the wall. When I told him what I'd discovered, his response was infuriatingly practical. "Maybe we should just tell Abby now, before she puts in any more work. If your dad has already decided on the restaurant, fighting it will just cause drama. So we just give in? Let him steamroll us again?" The anger in my voice surprised even me. I'm saying pick your battles, Wendy. Is this really worth creating a family rift? I wanted to scream that, yes, it was worth it. That this wasn't just about a dinner, it was about Abby's sense of worth, about standing up to my father's controlling behavior after decades of compliance. But I swallowed those words. I'm not telling her, I said finally. Not yet. Let's see how this plays out. So I kept quiet and watched my daughter continue her meticulous preparations. She practiced plating techniques, calculated serving times, and even rehearsed a beautiful speech about what her grandmother meant to her. All while I carried the secret that it might all be for nothing. 2 days before the birthday, Abby and I transformed our dining and living rooms into an elegant space worthy of a special celebration. We pushed furniture against walls, set up borrowed tables in a U shape, and covered everything with the handmade tablecloths. Abby created a display table for her grandmother's gifts, and another for the 3-tier cake she'd spent days designing. Do you think Grandpa will finally see that I'm serious about cooking? She asked as we worked. The question broke my heart because I could hear the yearning for approval beneath her confident exterior. Anyone who tastes your food knows you're the real deal, I assured her, avoiding a direct answer about my father. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, rehearsing confrontations with my father that I knew I'd never actually initiate. By morning, I had convinced myself that everything would work out, that once my parents arrived and saw Abby's incredible spread, even my father wouldn't be able to stick to his restaurant plan. I was wrong. The day before the party, our kitchen looked like something from a cooking competition show. Every surface was covered with prepped ingredients in labeled containers. The refrigerator and borrowed coolers were packed with partially completed dishes ready for final assembly. The house smelled amazing, like herbs, butter, and the promise of celebration. Abby had been up since 5 that morning, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, moving through the kitchen with focused precision. She checked items off her master list with satisfaction, occasionally calling me in to taste something or help with a task requiring extra hands. The timing is perfect, she said, consulting her spreadsheet. The roast needs 4 hours, which means I'll put it in at 2 tomorrow. The Yorkshire puddings take 20 minutes and need to rest for 10. The appetizers are mostly done and just need final assembly. The cake layers are baked and just need to be filled and frosted tomorrow morning. I watched her capable hands moving confidently through these complex preparations and felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This talented, dedicated young woman was my daughter. Whatever happened with my father's plans, I needed to make sure she knew how extraordinary she was. I'm so proud of you, sweetie, I said, hugging her from behind as she piped filling into tiny pastry shells. No matter what happens tomorrow, what you've accomplished here is incredible. She turned to face me, her expression suddenly vulnerable. Do you think Grandpa will finally see that I could make it as a chef? That it's not just a hobby? I hesitated, not wanting to lie but unable to voice my fears. Your grandfather has always had certain ideas about careers and success. But anyone who really looks at what you've created here can see your talent and dedication. She seemed satisfied with that answer and returned to her meticulous work, humming softly to herself. I felt a wave of protectiveness so fierce it almost frightened me. Why had I allowed my father's approval to matter so much to both of us for so long? At 3 in the afternoon, as Abby was preparing to start on the cake frosting, my phone buzzed with a text. I was elbow deep in dishwater, so I asked her to check it. It's from Grandpa, she said, picking up my phone. I watched her face as she read the message, saw the exact moment her expression shifted from concentration to confusion to heartbreak. What does it say? I asked, though I already knew it wouldn't be good news. She swallowed hard before reading aloud. We've decided to celebrate at the lakeside tomorrow at 6, adults only. Tell Abby thanks for the offer, but this will be more elegant. No gifts necessary. The silence that followed was deafening. Abby carefully placed my phone on the counter, her hands trembling slightly, and turned back to her mixing bowl. It's fine, she said in a voice that was anything but fine. I understand. The lakeside is really nice, and adults should have their own celebration. Abby, really, Mom? It's okay. She forced a smile that broke my heart. I can freeze most of this stuff. We'll have fancy dinners for weeks. I dried my hands and pulled her into a hug, feeling her body rigid with the effort not to cry. This isn't right, I whispered. Your grandfather had no right to do this, especially not at the last minute. She pulled away, blinking rapidly. Maybe he didn't know how far along I was with the preparations. Or maybe Grandma really preferred a restaurant. It's her birthday, after all. Before I could respond, Daniel arrived, letting himself in with the key I'd given him months ago. He took one look at our faces and knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked, setting down the bags of ice he'd brought for the party. I showed him the text. His expression shifted from concern to resignation. I'm sorry, but I'm not surprised. I told you your father. Not now, Daniel. I cut him off, acutely aware of Abby pretending to be busy with her cake frosting, her shoulders hunched protectively. He lowered his voice. Look, it's disappointing, but maybe it's for the best. No family drama, professional service, everyone happy. Everyone except Abby, you mean? I hissed back. She'll understand. It's just dinner. But it wasn't just dinner, and his inability to see that made me question how well he really knew us after 2 years together. This was about respect, consideration, and valuing someone's hard work and dreams. It was about my father's continuing ability to control and manipulate our family dynamics, and my own complicity in allowing it for so many years. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my cousin Jennifer, who lived nearby and had been genuinely excited about Abby's dinner plans. Wendy, I just got the text from Uncle Frank about the change of plans, she said without preamble. What the hell? Abby's been planning this for weeks. I know, I replied, stepping onto the back porch for privacy. We just found out too. You just found out? But that's not. She trailed off. What, Jennifer? She sighed heavily. Frank told everyone else about the restaurant plans 3 days ago. He specifically asked us not to mention it to you or Abby, because he said he wanted to tell you himself at the right time. My free hand curled into a fist. 3 days ago? Are you sure? Positive. He sent out a group text to everyone except you. I assumed you already knew, and were just playing along until he officially announced it. God, Wendy. I'm so sorry. If I'd realized you were actually still preparing, I would have said something. Did he say why the change of plans? Something about wanting to make it special for Eleanor, and how the lakeside has this new chef they've been wanting to try. And honestly, the adults. Only thing seemed weird to me because all the kids were invited to your place. After getting off the phone, I leaned against the porch railing, trying to control my anger. My father had deliberately kept us in the dark while informing everyone else, letting Abby continue with elaborate preparations he knew would be wasted. And the adults' only stipulation was clearly designed to exclude Abby while allowing other adults to attend. When I came back inside, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone while Abby mechanically continued frosting her cake, her movements no longer carrying their earlier joy and purpose. We should start canceling the rental items, Daniel said practically. No sense paying for tables and chairs we won't use. I'm going to call my father first, I replied, dialing his number before I could lose my nerve. He didn't answer, probably deliberately, so I left a message asking him to call me back immediately. He didn't. Instead, my mother called an hour later, her voice apologetic but firm. Wendy, dear, I know you're probably upset, but your father feels the lakeside would be more appropriate for my 70th. You understand, don't you? We can have a family gathering at your place another time. Did you know Abby has been cooking for 3 days? That she spent her entire savings on ingredients? A pause. No. I didn't realize it had gone that far. But surely she can save some of it? That's not the point, Mom. Did you know Dad told everyone else about the change of plans days ago but deliberately kept it from us? Another longer pause. Frank handles the communications, dear. I'm sure he had his reasons. It was the same passive acceptance she'd shown throughout their 50-year marriage, and suddenly I was tired of it. Tired of the way we all tiptoed around my father's controlling behavior, making excuses, and accepting his manipulations as just Frank being Frank. After hanging up, I found Abby in the pantry, staring blankly at shelves of ingredients she'd purchased for the dinner. When she turned to me, her eyes were red but dry. "I didn't want you to see me cry," she said softly. "It's stupid to be this upset about a dinner." I pulled her into my arms, feeling her thin shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. "It's not stupid. You put your heart into this, and what Grandpa did was wrong and cruel." "Maybe I'm not as good as I thought," she whispered. "Maybe he knew the food wouldn't be up to his standards." "No," I said firmly, holding her at arm's length. "This has nothing to do with your abilities. Your grandfather never even gave your food a fair chance. This is about control, his need to control every situation, every family event, every narrative about what constitutes success or talent." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. We spent the next hour together salvaging what food we could, packaging things for the freezer, and discarding preparations that wouldn't keep. Daniel helped silently, shooting me concerned glances whenever Abby left the room. "You need to let this go," he said when we were alone. "Continuing to fight it will just make everything worse." I stared at him, suddenly seeing clearly what I'd been ignoring for months. Daniel was just like my father in his own way: conflict, averse to the point of enabling bad behavior, preferring the appearance of harmony over the messiness of standing up for what's right. "I'm not going to let this go," I said quietly. "Not this time." Later that night, after Daniel had gone home, and Abby had finally fallen asleep exhausted, I sat alone in my kitchen surrounded by the evidence of my daughter's shattered plans. Something had to change, and it had to start with me. I opened Facebook, casually scrolling through recent posts until I spotted one from my father's golf club congratulating their new sous chef, Scott Williams, on his recent promotion. The accompanying photo showed a young man in chef's whites standing next to my beaming father. The caption mentioned that Scott would be preparing a special tableside presentation for select club members at the lakeside this weekend. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about my father's usual controlling behavior. It was about showcasing his golf buddy's son, a real chef, while dismissing Abby's culinary ambitions. The adults' only stipulation wasn't about creating an elegant atmosphere. It was specifically designed to exclude Abby while allowing him to parade Scott's talents before the family. I closed my laptop, a cold determination settling over me. For too long, I'd allowed my father's manipulations to go unchallenged, teaching Abby by example to seek approval from someone who would never freely give it. That ended now. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in our darkened living room, surrounded by the carefully arranged tables and handmade decorations that would now go unused, and thought about patterns. The patterns of behavior we establish and perpetuate until they become so familiar we can't imagine breaking them. For 38 years, I had been my father's dutiful daughter. Even after I became a mother myself, even after I'd built an independent life, I still instinctively sought his approval and acquiesced to his demands to keep the peace. And in doing so, I'd taught Abby to do the same, to value his grudging acknowledgement over her own sense of accomplishment, to accept his dismissals as judgment on her worth rather than what they really were, reflections of his own rigid worldview. A memory surfaced from when I was about Abby's age. I'd written a short story that won a statewide competition. When I showed my father the award certificate, his response had been, "Writing is a nice hobby, but it won't pay the bills." Then he'd returned to his newspaper without reading my story. My mother had framed the certificate and hung it in my bedroom, but she never challenged his dismissal of my achievement. I'd put away my writing after that, focusing instead on practical subjects that would lead to stable employment. It wasn't until years later that I recognized what I'd lost, not just a potential career path, but the confidence to pursue my passions without requiring external validation. Was I allowing history to repeat itself with Abby? The thought sent a chill through me despite the warm summer night. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, packed with food my daughter had prepared with such care and hope. Food that represented not just hours of work but her dreams for the future. Around 3 a.m, I made my decision. It crystallized suddenly. After hours of circular thinking, we would have the dinner anyway. Not for my parents, not for the relatives who had agreed to my father's last-minute change of plans, but for Abby to show her that her work had value, that her dreams deserved respect, and that some people would choose her table over the lakesides any day. But who would come? The guest list had included 23 family members, all of whom were now expected at my father's restaurant celebration. I needed to find 23 people who would appreciate Abby's talent and give her the audience she deserved. I picked up my phone and hesitated only briefly before texting our neighbor Judy, who had always been kind to Abby and genuinely interested in her cooking. "Are you awake?" I texted, not really expecting a response at this hour. To my surprise, 3 dots appeared immediately. "Yes, insomnia. Everything okay?" I explained the situation as concisely as possible, ending with, "I know it's last minute, but would you and Ted be willing to come to dinner tomorrow at 6? I want to show Abby that some people value her hard work." Judy's response was immediate. "Absolutely. Ted and I would be honored. That girl has incredible talent, and what your father did is shameful. We'll be there with bells on." Encouraged, I made a list of other potential guests. Abby's culinary arts teacher who had been mentoring her, several of her close friends and their parents, a few colleagues from work who had enjoyed Abby's cooking at previous gatherings, and several other neighbors who had always been supportive. By dawn, I had tentative commitments from 18 people. It wasn't 23, but it was enough to make the dinner viable. I felt a strange sense of calm, as if having made the decision to stand up to my father, even in this indirect way, had lifted a weight I'd carried for decades. When Abby woke and came downstairs, her eyes still puffy from crying herself to sleep, I was ready with fresh coffee and my plan. "We're still having the dinner," I announced. "Not for Grandma and Grandpa, but for you to celebrate your incredible talent and hard work." She blinked at me in confusion. "But everyone's going to the lakeside." "Not everyone," I replied with more confidence than I felt. "I've invited some people who actually want to taste your amazing food and celebrate what you've accomplished. People who believe in you." "Who?" she asked skeptically. As I showed her the list, her expression shifted from doubt to cautious hope. "Mrs. Peterson is coming? But she's the best cook I know." "Exactly. She appreciates talent when she sees it." Abby bit her lip. "What about Grandma? She's the one I really wanted to cook for." The question hurt because I knew how much my mother's opinion meant to Abby. "I don't know, honey. That's her choice to make. But what I do know is that we're going to have a wonderful dinner with people who are here specifically to support you." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Okay. I'll need to adjust some quantities, but most of the prep is done. I can make this work." Her resilience amazed me. While I'd spent the night agonizing over my father's manipulation, she was already problem-solving, adapting her plans to the new circumstances. In that moment, I realized she was stronger than I had been at her age, stronger than I was, even now, in many ways. Throughout the morning, I continued reaching out to potential guests, while Abby revised her cooking timeline. By noon, we had confirmed 21 attendees, still too short of the original count, but enough to fill our dining room with supportive energy. Around 1 o'clock, my phone rang. It was my sister Laura. "I just talked to Mom," she said without preamble. "Is it true you're still having the dinner without them?" "Yes," I replied, bracing for criticism. "Abby put too much work into this to just throw it all away. We've invited other people who actually want to be here." "Wow," Laura said, and to my surprise, I heard admiration in her voice. I don't think I've ever heard you stand up to Dad like this. It's been a long time coming." A pause. "He's furious, you know. Says you're being childish and deliberately trying to ruin Mom's birthday." Of course he would frame it that way. This isn't about him or even Mom anymore. It's about showing Abby that her work has value. "I get that," Laura said softly. "Listen, I know this is awkward, but would it be okay if the boys and I came to Abby's dinner instead of the lakeside? The twins adore her, and that chocolate cake she made for their birthday last year is all they talked about for weeks." I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a moment. Laura had always been the peacemaker, the one who never rocked the boat. "What about Richard?" I asked, referring to her husband who was notoriously eager to stay in my father's good graces due to business connections. "He can go to the lakeside if he wants. but the boys and I would rather be with you and Abby." After hanging up with Laura, I sat at my kitchen table feeling slightly dazed. The dynamic was shifting in ways I hadn't anticipated, and Laura wasn't the only one to call. Within the next 2 hours, I received calls from my cousins Jennifer and Mark, my Aunt Patty, and my Uncle Jim, all asking if they could attend Abby's dinner instead of the restaurant. "Don't tell your father yet," Uncle Jim advised. "He'll just try to arm everyone back into line. Better to present him with a fait accompli." By mid-afternoon, our guest count had risen to 85 more than we'd originally planned for. I was scrambling to borrow extra chairs when my phone rang again. This time it was my father, and his voice was cold with fury. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" he demanded without greeting. "Hello to you too, Dad," I replied, my newfound resolve helping me maintain composure. "Don't play games with me, Wendy. Laura tells me you're still having dinner at your place and that she's attending with the boys. What kind of daughter tries to sabotage her own mother's birthday celebration?" "I'm not sabotaging anything. Mom will have her celebration at the lakeside with you and whoever else chooses to go there. Abby will also serve the dinner she spent days preparing for guests who want to attend." "This is childish and embarrassing," he snapped. "You're creating a family rift over a simple change of venue." "No, Dad. You created the rift when you decided to change plans at the last minute without any consideration for Abby's feelings or the work she'd put in. You created it when you told everyone else days ago, but deliberately kept us in the dark. And you've been creating it for years by undermining her confidence and dismissing her dreams. That's ridiculous. I've always supported both of you." "Really? Is that why you've been discouraging Mom from eating Abby's cooking? Why you've consistently belittled her culinary ambitions as just a hobby? Why you're so eager to showcase Scott Williams' talents while dismissing hers?" His momentary silence told me I'd hit the mark. "Scott is a trained professional with a degree from a prestigious culinary institute," he finally said. "Abby is a 16-year-old with an unrealistic fantasy about becoming a chef, without understanding the brutal reality of the restaurant industry. She understands more than you think, and she deserves the chance to pursue her passion without having her own grandfather actively working against her." "I'm trying to protect her from disappointment," he insisted. "And I'm certainly not going to apologize for wanting a proper celebration for your mother at a professional establishment rather than a cramped house with amateur catering." The casual cruelty of his dismissal strengthened my resolve. "Then enjoy your proper celebration, Dad. We'll be having a wonderful dinner here with people who actually support Abby." "You're making a mistake," he warned. "And you're going to regret drawing this line in the sand." After hanging up, I leaned against the counter, my hands shaking slightly but my mind clear. For the first time in my adult life, I had directly challenged my father's authority without backing down, without seeking compromise or making excuses for his behavior. It felt terrifying and liberating all at once. Daniel came by around 4, concerned after hearing about the family drama from my father, who had apparently called him directly. "You're really going through with this alternative dinner?" he asked, his expression troubled. "Your father is livid. He says you're deliberately trying to divide the family." "Of course that's how he sees it," I replied, continuing to arrange flowers for the centerpieces. Any challenge to his authority is an attack in his mind. Daniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But is this really worth it, Wendy? Creating all this conflict just to prove a point?" I set down the flowers and looked at him directly. "This isn't about proving a point. It's about standing up for Abby, showing her that her work has value and that she doesn't need to accept being dismissed or devalued. And honestly, it's about me finally setting boundaries with my father after a lifetime of giving in to keep the peace." "I understand that, but do you?" I interrupted. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're more concerned with avoiding conflict than supporting what's right." His expression hardened. "That's not fair. I care about you and Abby. I just think there are better ways to handle family disagreements than creating competing events and forcing people to choose sides. I didn't create this situation. My father did when he deliberately undermined Abby's plans without any consideration for her feelings or effort. The question isn't whether I'm overreacting. It's why you're so quick to suggest we should just accept being treated disrespectfully." We stared at each other for a long moment, something fundamental shifting between us. Then, to my surprise, his expression softened. "You're right," he said quietly. "I do tend to avoid conflict, maybe too much. It's how I've always dealt with my own family issues." He took my hand. "I'm sorry. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you. Just tell me how I can help with dinner tonight." His support, unexpected after his initial resistance, brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." As evening approached, a sense of nervous anticipation filled our house. Abby moved through the kitchen with renewed purpose, her earlier heartbreak transformed into determination to create something exceptional. I watched her direct Daniel and Laura's boys in simple preparation tasks, her confidence growing with each successful dish completed. The dining room was transformed into an elegant space, with borrowed tables arranged in a U, shape covered with sage green tablecloths. Candles and flower arrangements created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Handwritten place cards marked each setting, though we'd had to create several new ones for our additional guests. At 5:30, our first guests began to arrive, each bringing small gifts for Abby rather than my mother, a gesture that brought fresh tears to her eyes. Mrs. Hemmon 7, Peterson, her culinary arts teacher, presented her with a professional chef's knife engraved with her name. "Every serious chef needs proper tools," she said, embracing my daughter. By 5:45, our house was filled with the buzz of conversation and genuine excitement about the meal to come. Abby, wearing a chef's coat borrowed from her culinary arts class, moved between the kitchen and dining room with quiet confidence, accepting compliments with grace, and explaining her menu to interested guests. Looking around at the gathering, at my sister helping arrange final place settings, at Daniel carving the roast under Abby's direction, at neighbors and friends who had come specifically to support a talented young woman's dream, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Whatever happened with my parents, whatever fallout came from standing up to my father, this moment made it worthwhile. At precisely 6 o'clock, as Abby was preparing to welcome everyone and explain the first course, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother standing alone on the porch, looking nervous but determined. "Mom?" I said in surprise. "I thought you'd be at the lakeside." She adjusted her purse strap, a gesture she always made when she was gathering courage. "I want to taste my granddaughter's cooking," she said simply. "May I come in?" The moment my mother stepped into our crowded dining room, a hush fell over the gathering. She stood uncertainly in the doorway, her elegant pantsuit and carefully styled silver hair, making her look somewhat out of place among our more casually dressed guests. Abby emerged from the kitchen, still wearing her borrowed chef's coat with a dish towel thrown over one shoulder. For a heartbeat, grandmother and granddaughter stared at each other across the room. Then Abby's face broke into a radiant smile. "Grandma, you came!" She rushed forward to embrace my mother, who held her tightly, closing her eyes as if savoring the moment. "I wouldn't miss your cooking for the world, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Happy birthday to me, indeed." I gestured to the empty chair we'd added to accommodate her, the 29th guest, at what had originally been a dinner for 23. "We saved you a place," I said simply, meeting her eyes with a look that communicated more than words could. She nodded slightly, understanding passing between us. My mother had spent 50 years deferring to my father's preferences and demands. Her presence here tonight, without him, represented a small but significant act of independence. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she confided quietly, as I helped her into her seat. "I told him I had a headache and needed to lie down before dinner. He's at the lakeside greeting the guests." Her expression was a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I've never lied to him before." "You're not doing anything wrong, Mom," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "You're supporting your granddaughter, and there's nothing wrong with that." Abby's dinner service began with an elegant amuse-bouche, a tiny spoon holding a perfect bite of smoked salmon mousse with fresh dill and a dot of lemon gel. As the small plates were passed around, I watched my mother's face closely. She took her first taste hesitantly, then her eyes widened in surprise and pleasure. "This is extraordinary," she said, loud enough for Abby to hear from the kitchen doorway. Absolutely extraordinary. The genuine admiration in her voice caused Abby to blush with pleasure before disappearing back into the kitchen to supervise the plating of the first course, a chilled cucumber soup with mint oil and crab salad. The dinner progressed with each course more impressive than the last. The roast beef was perfectly cooked to a rosy medium, rare. The Yorkshire puddings light and airy. Seasonal vegetables were prepared simply, but expertly, allowing their natural flavors to shine. Between courses, Abby would emerge briefly to explain her choices and techniques, growing more confident with each round of genuine praise from our appreciative guests. Mrs. Peterson, the culinary arts teacher, was particularly vocal in her admiration. This level of execution and flavor balance is rare, even among my advanced students, she declared after the main course. Abby has a natural talent that can't be taught. My mother listened to these assessments with increasing interest, asking thoughtful questions about cooking techniques and flavor profiles. It occurred to me that perhaps she had been genuinely unaware of the extent of Abby's abilities, having been subtly discouraged from fully experiencing her cooking by my father's dismissive attitudes. During the dessert course, the reimagined caramel apple pie my mother had described from her childhood, I watched her take her first bite and saw tears spring to her eyes. "It tastes exactly like I remember," she whispered, reaching for Abby's hand across the table. "How did you manage that when even my mother lost the recipe?" "I pieced it together from your descriptions," Abby explained, "and then I experimented with different techniques and ingredients until it felt right." My mother shook her head in wonder. "Your grandfather, my father, would have been so impressed by your talent. He always said cooking was an art that required both precision and intuition. It was the opening I needed to address what had been left unspoken all evening." "And what does Dad think of Abby's cooking, Mom? Has he ever really given it a chance?" She looked down at her plate, uncomfortable with the direct question. "Your father has certain ideas about what constitutes a suitable career. It's how he was raised. But this isn't about careers," I pressed gently. "This is about recognizing and supporting Abby's passion and talent, regardless of where it leads." Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. My father. I excused myself and stepped onto the back porch to answer. "Where's your mother?" he demanded without preamble, his voice tight with anger. "Hello to you too, Dad. I'm having a lovely evening, thanks for asking." "Don't play games, Wendy. Eleanor isn't answering her phone, and she's not at the house." "Is she with you?" I hesitated, not wanting to lie but also not wanting to betray my mother's choice to attend our dinner. "Why don't you ask her that question yourself, when she's ready to talk to you?" "This is ridiculous," he fumed. "I have 20 people at the lakeside, waiting to celebrate her birthday, including Scott, who's prepared a special tableside dessert presentation in her honor. And now the guest of honor is missing." "I'm sorry that's inconvenient for you," I replied, surprised by my own calm in the face of his anger. "But Mom is an adult who can make her own choices about where she wants to be." "Put her on the phone right now," he ordered. "No, Dad. I'm not going to interrupt her dinner to deal with your demands. She'll talk to you when she's ready." I could practically hear him sputtering with rage on the other end of the line. "You've manipulated this entire situation," he accused. "Turned my own wife against me with your petty revenge dinner. That's not what happened, and I think you know it. Mom made her own choice to be here, just like Laura and the boys, and Aunt Patty, and Uncle Jim, and the cousins. Maybe instead of blaming me, you should ask yourself why so many family members chose Abby's dinner over yours." There was a moment of startled silence before he recovered. "This conversation isn't over," he said darkly. "Tell your mother I expect her home by 10. Then he hung up. I returned to the dining room to find the atmosphere still warm and festive. Someone had started an impromptu toast to both my mother and Abby, with guests sharing their favorite moments from the meal and offering heartfelt birthday wishes. My mother caught my eye questioningly. "Was that Frank?" I nodded, but kept my voice light. "He was just checking in, nothing that can't wait until later." She seemed to accept this, turning her attention back to the celebration, but I noticed her checking her watch occasionally, aware that her deception had a time limit. As the evening progressed, guests began to share stories about their own experiences with cooking and family celebrations. My cousin Jennifer recounted how Abby had patiently taught her 8-year-old son to make pancakes during a family visit last year. Mrs. Peterson described Abby's growth in culinary arts class, from a hesitant beginner to one of her most accomplished students. My mother listened to these testimonials with growing emotion, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. When it came her turn to speak, she stood a bit unsteadily, champagne glass in hand. "I want to thank everyone for making my 70th birthday so special," she began. "Particularly my extraordinary granddaughter who created this incredible meal." She turned to Abby. "I don't think I fully understood until tonight just how talented you are, sweetheart. Your grandfather and I come from a generation that viewed cooking as a necessary domestic skill, not as the art form it truly is. But watching you tonight, seeing the creativity, precision, and love you put into every dish, I realize how short-sighted that view is." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm sorry I haven't been more supportive of your culinary ambitions. That changes tonight. Whatever path you choose to follow, I want you to know that I believe in you completely." Abby's eyes filled with tears as she embraced her grandmother. The moment was perfect until the doorbell rang with an aggressive, prolonged buzz that could only signify one person. The room fell silent as I went to answer it. My father stood on the porch, his face flushed with anger, flanked by my brother-in-law Richard and 2 other relatives who had apparently been drafted into his retrieval mission. "I've come to take Eleanor home," he announced loudly enough for everyone inside to hear. "This farce has gone on long enough." My father's imposing figure filled the doorway, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain tie slightly askew, a faint sheen of perspiration on his forehead despite the mild evening. Behind him, Richard looked distinctly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and avoiding my gaze. "May we come in?" my father asked with exaggerated politeness that did nothing to mask his anger. I stood my ground in the doorway. "That depends. Are you here to join our celebration or to disrupt it?" His jaw tightened. "I'm here to escort my wife to her actual birthday dinner, which you've deliberately sabotaged." From inside, I could hear the sudden hush of conversation as our guests became aware of the confrontation unfolding. I felt a presence at my shoulder and turned to find my mother standing there, her expression resolute despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Frank," she said quietly, "there's no need for a scene. I've had a lovely dinner here with Abby and the family. Why don't you come in and have some dessert? The cake is magnificent." He stared at her incredulously. "Dessert? Eleanor, I have 20 people at the lakeside waiting to celebrate your birthday. Scott has prepared a special presentation. The chef held our reservation despite our delay because of our history with the restaurant. And you want me to have cake in Wendy's living room?" 23 people, Richard corrected automatically, then flinched when my father shot him a withering look. "I've already celebrated my birthday," my mother replied with uncharacteristic firmness, "and it was wonderful. Please, either join us or go back to the lakeside, but I'm not going to allow this evening to end with an argument on the front porch." My father's face flushed darker, but before he could respond, Abby appeared beside my mother, still in her chef's coat, but with an air of newfound confidence. "Grandpa," she said, her voice steady, despite the tension, "I made your favorite dessert, 2 chocolate soufflé, with vanilla bean crème anglaise. It needs to be served immediately, or it will fall. Won't you come in and try it?" It was a perfect olive branch, offered with genuine warmth rather than capitulation. For a moment, I saw my father waver, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, as he registered the assured young woman standing before him, so different from the granddaughter, who had always sought his approval with anxious eyes. But the moment passed, his expression hardening once more. "This isn't about dessert, Abigail. This is about respect and family obligations. Your grandmother has responsibilities as the guest of honor at the dinner I arranged. A dinner with our friends and colleagues who have come specifically to celebrate with her." "Actually, it is about dessert," Abby replied with surprising poise. "And soup, and roast beef, and all the other dishes I spent 3 days preparing because I wanted to make something special for Grandma's birthday. It's about the time and care I put into this dinner that you dismissed without a second thought. It's about you deciding that what I made wasn't good enough without even trying it." Her words hung in the air between them, a truth so plainly stated that it couldn't be deflected or denied. My father seemed momentarily at a loss, unaccustomed to being directly challenged, especially by his 16-year-old granddaughter. "I never said your cooking wasn't good enough," he finally managed, his tone defensive. "You didn't have to say it. Your actions made it perfectly clear." Abby held his gaze steadily. "If you'd like to come in and try what I've made, you're welcome. If not, we understand, and we'll see you another time." With that, she turned and walked back inside, leaving my father staring after her in stunned silence. It was perhaps the first time in his life that he'd been dismissed so gracefully, yet firmly by someone he'd always considered under his authority. My mother touched his arm gently. "Frank, please. Don't make this into something it doesn't need to be. Come inside and join us, or go back to the lakeside and make our apologies. But let's not end the evening with harsh words." For a moment, I thought he might actually accept the invitation, might set aside his pride enough to see what was being offered not just dessert, but a chance to repair a relationship before it was irreparably damaged. But then he straightened his shoulders, adjusting his tie with precise movements. "I see how it is," he said coldly. "Well, I won't intrude further on this. Alternative celebration. Eleanor, when you're ready to return home, call me, and I'll send a car." With that, he turned and strode back to his Mercedes, Richard and the other relatives trailing awkwardly behind him. As we closed the door, I expected to feel tension or sadness at the confrontation, but instead I experienced a strange sense of lightness. For the first time in my adult life, I'd stood my ground with my father without backing down or making excuses for his behavior. More importantly, Abby had found her voice, speaking her truth with a confidence I'd never possessed at her age. We returned to the dining room to find our guests politely pretending they hadn't overheard the entire exchange. Abby was already serving her chocolate soufflés with practiced efficiency, the perfect rise on each one a testament to her timing and skill. As we took our seats, there was a moment of uncertain silence before my Uncle Jim raised his glass. "To Eleanor on her 70th birthday," he announced. "And to Abby, who has given us one of the finest meals I've had the pleasure of eating in years. May we all be fortunate enough to celebrate many more occasions with both of you." The toast broke the tension, conversation resuming with renewed warmth. My mother, after a brief period of quiet reflection, seemed to make a decision to fully engage in the celebration, laughing more freely than I'd seen in years, and asking Abby detailed questions about her culinary techniques. "I should have paid more attention before," she admitted at one point, watching Abby explain the process of making creme anglaise to Mrs. Peterson's enraptured 8-year-old daughter. "I've missed so much by letting your grandfather set all the terms of our family interactions." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, each took a moment to thank Abby personally, many commenting that it was the best meal they'd had in recent memory. Mrs. Peterson lingered, speaking with Abby in the kitchen, while I saw the last guests to the door. "I don't want to overstep," she said when she finally emerged, "but I've been so impressed with Abby's skills that I'd like to recommend her for a junior apprenticeship program at Riverside Grill. It's selective, they only take 2 high school students each year, but based on what I've seen tonight, she would be an exceptional candidate." Riverside Grill was one of the most respected restaurants in our area, known for its innovative cuisine and commitment to local ingredients. An apprenticeship there would be invaluable experience for someone considering culinary school. "That would be amazing," I replied, genuinely moved by her support. "Thank you." After everyone had left except for my mother, who had decided to spend the night rather than return home immediately, we began the cleanup process. Despite being exhausted from her marathon cooking session, Abby insisted on proper food storage and kitchen organization, directing Daniel and me with professional precision. "The dinner was perfect, sweetheart," I told her, as we worked side by side, wrapping leftovers that guests had been too full to take home. "You should be incredibly proud." She smiled, a quiet satisfaction replacing the need for approval that had driven her for so long. "I am proud. Not just of the food, but of how we handled everything. We didn't let Grandpa's decision ruin the celebration. We found another way." "You found another way," I corrected her. "I just followed your lead." Later, after Daniel had gone home with promises to return in the morning to help with the heavy cleanup, and my mother had retired to our guest room, Abby and I sat at the kitchen island sharing the last slice of birthday cake. "Do you think Grandpa will ever understand why tonight was so important?" she asked, her voice small for the first time that evening. I considered the question carefully, wanting to be honest without being harsh. "I don't know. Your grandfather has spent a lifetime believing he knows what's best for everyone. That's a hard habit to break, especially at 75. But you stood up to him," she pointed out. "After all these years—" "I did," I agreed, somewhat surprised by the realization. "And do you know why? Because watching you pour your heart into that dinner made me see how many times I've let him diminish the things that matter to me. How I've taught you by example to seek approval from someone who measures success by such narrow standards." She was quiet for a moment, pushing cake crumbs around her plate. "I still want him to be proud of me," she admitted finally. "Is that stupid?" "Not at all," I assured her, pulling her close. "It's natural to want the people we love to recognize our talents and support our dreams. But what tonight taught me, what you taught me, is that we can't make our sense of self-worth dependent on that recognition. Sometimes we have to create our own celebrations." We finished cleaning up and headed to bed, emotionally and physically exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond a successful dinner party. As I drifted off to sleep, I wondered what the long-term consequences of this night would be for our family relationships, whether bridges had been irreparably burned, or if new, more honest connections might emerge from the confrontation. "Did you know Abby has been cooking for 3 days? That she spent her entire savings on ingredients?" The pounding on the door was relentless, making the entire front of the house shake. I threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, finding my mother already in the hallway, her expression anxious. "It's Frank," she said unnecessarily. We both recognized the impatient, authoritative knock that had punctuated family gatherings throughout my childhood. I didn't have to wonder long. At exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, 15 hours after we had closed the door on my father's anger, a loud, insistent knocking jolted me awake. She squared her shoulders, smoothing down her borrowed nightgown. "I know, but we need to face this sooner or later." When I opened the door, my father stood on the porch looking distinctly unlike himself. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled. He wore the same clothes as the night before, now rumpled, and his silver hair was uncombed. Most shocking were his eyes, red, rimmed and underscored by dark circles that suggested a sleepless night. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. I stood aside, watching him carefully as he entered the living room, where evidence of last night's celebration still lingered. Borrowed tables, pushed against walls, flower arrangements slightly wilted in the morning light. "You didn't come home," he said to my mother, a statement rather than an accusation. "No," she replied simply. "I needed time to think." He nodded as if this made perfect sense, though I knew it represented a seismic shift in their relationship dynamics. Never in 50 years of marriage had my mother spent a night away without his knowledge and approval. "I waited up," he said, "all night." "I'm sorry you worried," she responded. "I should have called." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Abby appeared on the stairs, still in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. "Grandpa?" she said, surprise evident in her voice. "What are you doing here?" My father turned to face her, and I was startled by the vulnerability in his expression. "I came to apologize," he said, the words sounding strange in his mouth, as if he were speaking a foreign language he'd only recently learned. Abby descended the remaining stairs, moving to stand beside me. "For what, exactly?" she asked. Not confrontational, but genuinely seeking clarification. He cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "For disregarding your efforts. For changing plans without proper consideration of the work you'd put in. For not recognizing your talent." The admission seemed to cost him enormous effort, each word dragged reluctantly into the open air. But he continued, addressing my mother next. "And to you, Eleanor, for assuming I knew what would make you happy without actually asking. For 50 years, I've made decisions believing I was acting in your best interests. Last night, watching you choose to stay here rather than return home with me, it made me realize I may have been wrong about many things." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Frank," she said softly. He turned to me last. "Wendy, I owe you the biggest apology. I've dismissed your choices, criticized your parenting, and failed to see the remarkable young woman you've raised. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I stood speechless, unable to process this unprecedented display of humility from a man who had always viewed apologies as signs of weakness. Before I could respond, Abby stepped forward. "Would you like some breakfast, Grandpa? I made extra apple cinnamon rolls yesterday that we can heat up. Or I could make something fresh if you prefer." It was such a simple offer, yet so powerful in its generosity, extending hospitality to someone who had hurt her deeply just hours before. My father's composure finally cracked, his eyes growing suspiciously bright. "Apple cinnamon rolls sound wonderful," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. We moved to the kitchen, the four of us navigating this unfamiliar territory of vulnerability and tentative reconciliation. As Abby warmed the rolls and prepared coffee, an explanation for my father's transformation gradually emerged. After leaving our house the night before, he had returned to the lakeside to find many of the guests had also departed, unwilling to wait indefinitely for the birthday celebration to properly begin. Those who remained, mostly business associates and golf club friends rather than family, had been politely frustrated by the evening's disorganization. "Scott did his dessert presentation," my father recounted, staring into his coffee cup. "It was technically impressive, very professional. But," my mother prompted gently, "but there was no heart in it," he admitted. "No connection to you or our family history. It was a performance for strangers, not a gift of love." He described returning to an empty house afterward, the absence of my mother, a constant presence in his life, for 5 decades, forcing him to confront the consequences of his controlling behavior. He'd spent the night reviewing family albums, seeing with fresh eyes how often his rigid expectations had cast shadows over important moments. "There was a photo of Abby's 13th birthday," he said, looking at my daughter with genuine regret. "You made that chocolate raspberry cake that everyone raved about, and I remember saying something about professional bakeries being more reliable for special occasions." Abby nodded, the memory clearly still painful. "You said homemade cakes were charming but amateurish." "I was wrong," he said simply. "I was so caught up in appearances and what I thought success and excellence should look like that I couldn't recognize the real thing when it was right in front of me." As we ate the cinnamon rolls, which were indeed excellent, the conversation continued with a new honesty that felt both uncomfortable and necessary. My father admitted that his dismissal of Abby's culinary ambitions stemmed partly from his own father's narrow definition of respectable careers, a pattern he had unconsciously perpetuated. My father believed that real success came from business, law, medicine, or banking, he explained. Anything creative or service-oriented was considered lesser. I internalized that without ever questioning it. "But surely you've seen how the world has changed," I pointed out. "The culinary arts are highly respected now. Top chefs are celebrated like artists." "Of course I've seen it," he acknowledged. "But changing your deeply held beliefs is harder than simply observing cultural shifts. It's taken this," he gestured around the kitchen, indicating the events of the past 24 hours, "to make me realize how much damage I've done by holding on to outdated prejudices." My mother reached across the table to take his hand. "It's never too late to change, Frank, to see things differently. I want to try," he said, turning to Abby. "Starting with giving your cooking the attention and respect it deserves. If you're willing to give me another chance." Abby considered him thoughtfully. "I have leftovers from last night," she offered. "I could reheat a proper tasting menu for you, smaller portions of everything, so you can try it all." The simple suggestion brought a smile to my father's tired face. "I'd like that very much." The impromptu tasting became a turning point in their relationship. As my father sampled each dish, Abby explained her techniques and ingredient choices with growing confidence. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a more nuanced understanding of food than I'd realized he possessed. "This Yorkshire pudding is exceptional," he commented, examining the airy structure. "Perfect rise. My grandmother used to make these, but they were never this consistent. The secret is resting the batter and having the fat smoking hot before pouring it in," Abby explained. I tested 4 different techniques before finding the one that worked best. That kind of methodical approach would serve you well in culinary school, he observed, surprising us all. Have you looked into programs yet? The conversation that followed was surreal. My father asking detailed questions about culinary education options, discussing the business aspects of restaurant management, and even suggesting industry connections who might offer mentorship. It was as if a wall had come down, revealing a person capable of growth and change that none of us had fully believed existed. Later that afternoon, as my parents prepared to leave together, my mother having decided to return home after extracting certain promises about their relationship going forward, my father took me aside. "I meant what I said about being sorry, Wendy," he said quietly. "Not just about the dinner, but about years of trying to control you and Abby rather than supporting your choices. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I'm going to try to do better." "That's all any of us can do," I replied, surprising myself by initiating a hug that he returned awkwardly but sincerely. After they left, Daniel came by as promised to help with cleanup. He listened with amazement as Abby and I recounted my father's morning visit and apparent transformation. "People can surprise you," he reflected, helping me stack borrowed chairs. "Even when you think you know exactly who they are and what they're capable of." "Speaking of surprises," I said, remembering something important, "I owe you an apology too. I was harsh with you yesterday when you suggested we should accommodate my father's plans. I accused you of wanting to avoid conflict rather than stand up for what's right." He shrugged. "You weren't entirely wrong. I do tend to choose the path of least resistance. It's something I'm working on. Still, the way you showed up for us last night, helping with the dinner even after I pushed back, that meant a lot." He smiled, pulling me close. "I learned something important from watching you stand your ground. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to challenge them to be better, even if it creates temporary discomfort." 3 weeks later, life had settled into a new pattern. My father, true to his word, was making efforts to change his controlling behavior, though decades of habits didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments of tension, but they were now followed by genuine attempts at understanding rather than stonewalling or manipulation. The most significant change was in his relationship with Abby. He had not only written a letter of recommendation for her Riverside Grill apprenticeship application, but had also started taking her to dinner at various restaurants around the city, engaging her in conversations about menu design, ingredient sourcing, and culinary techniques. "He's actually listening to my opinions," she marveled after one such outing. "Really listening, not just waiting for his turn to tell me why I'm wrong." For my part, I found myself standing up more confidently in other areas of my life, negotiating a long, overdue promotion at work, setting boundaries with difficult clients, and expressing my needs more clearly in my relationship with Daniel. It was as if the experience of finally confronting my father had strengthened muscles I'd allowed to atrophy over years of accommodation. On a warm Saturday evening, exactly 1 month after the birthday dinner, we received unexpected news. Mrs. Peterson called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Abby's been accepted to the apprenticeship program at Riverside Grill," she announced. "But there's more." Chef Marcus was so impressed with her application and the dishes she prepared for the tasting that he's offering her a part-time position in addition to the apprenticeship. He said her caramel apple pie was the best dessert he's tasted in years. Abby's face, as I shared the news, was incandescent. Years of working toward a dream, of pushing through dismissal and doubt, had culminated in this moment of validation from a respected professional in her chosen field. We celebrated that night with a simple dinner at home, just the 3 of us. Abby, Daniel, and me. As we raised glasses to toast her success, I reflected on the journey of the past month and the lessons it had taught all of us. "I've been thinking," I said, setting down my glass, "about what happened with Grandpa and the birthday dinner and everything that's come after. There's something powerful about standing firm in your truth, even when it would be easier to back down. Not in an aggressive way, but with dignity and self-respect. Like you did with Grandpa," Abby noted. "Like we both did," I corrected her. "And look what came from it, not just your apprenticeship, but real changes in our family dynamics. Sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is refuse to participate in patterns that diminish us or others. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. It takes courage to challenge the status quo, especially with people who've held power over you for a long time. The amazing thing, Abby reflected, is that by standing up for myself and my cooking, I actually helped Grandpa too. If we'd just given in like always, he might never have had that moment of realization. Exactly, I agreed. True respect has to be mutual. When we demand it for ourselves while still offering it to others, we create the possibility for genuine connection. As the evening wound down, I found myself filled with gratitude, not just for the positive outcomes of our stand against my father's controlling behavior, but for the growth it had catalyzed in all of us. Abby was stepping confidently toward her future in the culinary world. I was reclaiming my voice after years of silencing. Even my parents were finding a more balanced relationship after 5 decades of established patterns. The birthday dinner that almost didn't happen had become a turning point, a moment when patterns broke and new possibilities emerged. All because we'd chosen to value ourselves enough to stand firm in what mattered. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself or someone you love, even when it was difficult? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful growth, and sharing our experiences helps others find the courage to have those conversations too. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for being here, and I wish you the strength to stand in your truth, especially when it's challenging.